Hello, this is my Activity 7 presentation. It was made by Mitchell and Hema, who are part of Group 9 for Software Engineering 6310. Oops. So for our first insider threat, we have the Maryland identity theft. This theft was done by Mark A. Bell, a 49-year-old. He worked for the District of Columbia's Department of Youth Rehabilitation Services, or DYRS for short. There was at least 1,200 fraudulent federal income tax returns filed through this scheme. It was a multi-year scheme with many, many people. There's approximately 20 participants in total in this, I guess you could call it a pyramid scheme of some sort. He actually got only 4 years in prison after pleading guilty for this, which is pretty funny because another one of his accomplices, who admittedly did less than him, had to serve 5 years minimum. He, of course, also had to pay all the money back. It wasn't just the jail time. And if we learned a lesson from this, or they learned a lesson from this, don't steal from the IRS. Generally a bad idea. Messing with the government's money is not a good thing to do. So, Mark's motivations were that he had easy access to the identities of a lot of young people and old people alike. Another motivation would be that the money was very difficult to trace. You know, a lot of these people weren't keeping up on their taxes or whatever they were supposed to be doing because they were incarcerated at this time or past this time. And, you know, what are you going to do if you're incarcerated and your identity gets stolen? You're not even going to know. And the last of his motivations was that other people were relying on him to make them money. So he had a lot of external pressure. You know, there was 20 people involved in this scheme and everyone was making a lot of money from it. So he had a lot of pressure in that department. Now, the technology used was actually very simple. He was a program manager at the DYRS. So that gave him access to the databases that he needed to get this information. Of course, that included names, date of birth, social security numbers of anyone that was previously or presently in the DYRS system. And they filed through one of the accomplices' estates and made, those 1,200 or 12,000 fraudulent claims. Net totaling about $4 million that they wanted, and they only got about $2 million out of it, which all had to be paid back. Now, how sophisticated were these attacks? Technology-wise, very low. But on the tax front, they were much higher sophistication because, you know, taxes are difficult and working around a system like that. But they were government officials, so to an extent, they knew how to do taxes. This was more an abuse of power than a technology crime because all he had to do was access databases. There was no hacking involved, just logging in with his credentials that were given to him by, you know, the DYRS themselves. And that concludes our first insider threat. Next up, we've got the Enervest sabotage. This was done by Ricky Joe Mitchell, a 34-year-old. He was a network engineer responsible for the server maintenance and upkeep. He served up to 10 years in prison for the sabotage, and it caused the business to be offline for an entire month. These attacks were very, very devastating for Enervest. Oops. Now, what were his motivations? He got fired, and he wanted revenge for getting fired. You know, people aren't usually happy when they get fired. How sophisticated were the attacks? The Enervest servers were offline for an entire month. Now, they had to be essentially built from the ground up because the attack that Mr. Mitchell did was very devastating to the data itself that, you know, the company relied on. It actually deleted cloud data that was backed up. And, cloud data, a company based off of investing, it's a little important to have that data. Now, this was an insider attack, of course, and Mr. Mitchell had access to logins. So all he did was he logged into his normal credentials remotely and reset all the company servers to factory settings, which pretty much deleted the entire business. That's a very rude thing to do. Now, this, of course, was very low technology, but it did have a massive, massive amount of damage. A common theme for these insider threats is they're often not, difficult technology-wise. They just require an abuse of power, which this is also another case of. As with the Maryland theft, it was a man who could log into a server and see all the information needed. For this one, it was a guy who could remotely log into a server and probably run a script and press a button and the server's reset and deleted, the entirety of EnerVest. All right, thank you for listening.